Well, let's move on. Let's talk about Oklahoma State here. Oklahoma State is a team that on this show we were so high on last year. When everyone else was zigging, we zagged, and it made us some big bucks. We hammered their over 6.5. We took them to win the Big 12 and then had the hedge of the century, um, which actually didn't end up making that much money because it was such a large hedge. But it's still kind of cool that they're my dark horse to win the Big 12, and uh, I didn't feel like a ton of people were talking about it. I think some people in the media had Oklahoma State doing pretty well just because of their schedule, but um, this year they returned a lot of folks from that team last year, particularly on the offensive side of the ball.
Jeez,
Okay.
man.
And I just got in an argument with someone today about the uh they were trying to convince me that Peyton Thorne is a significantly, and they use the word significantly better quarterback than Alan Bowman. And I was like, what? Like, I know Alan Bowman hasn't been consistent his entire career. I know that, right? But also he was getting shoved in and out of the games like the first like 4 weeks of the season. And then he got settled in, and there were some games he played really well, particularly at home. And when I look at the schedule, I'm seeing a lot of their tough matchups are at home. So uh their win total is at 9.5, which is crazy. So I don't hate Alan Bowman. All right. I'm not gonna put him in the top half. I'm not gonna put him in the top half of college football quarterbacks in Power Four, but I think he's serviceable enough for what this offense is gonna want to do this year. I mean, you got Ollie Gordon back, you know. As long as he stays healthy, and that is an if because he's gonna be touching the ball a ton. Um, as long as Ollie Gordon stays healthy, I'm going to be really confident in this offense. I also really like the receivers as well. I mean, of course, that's highlighted by Brennan Presley and Rashad Owens, and we can get there when we get there. But the running back room is also interesting too because they got AJ Green out of the portal from Arkansas, who I thought was pretty good, but he suffered a leg injury. I don't think he's going to play this year. So that is something to consider in terms of that running back room. Um, the depth there, we'll see. Trent Holland comes over from Indiana.
I like
Uh,
Trent Howland. I like
you
Trent
do?
Howland.
Okay. All right.
He is a guy a good amount of teams. And now is he have starter plus upside where if Ollie Gordon misses multiple weeks, is he gonna carry that load? Absolutely not. But nobody is for Ollie Gordon, right? But Trent Howland's a guy that can be very, very serviceable as a backup for Ollie Gordon. And I do think give him at least some break and spell in terms of, you know, keeping him healthy for the duration of the season. And yeah, you mentioned the AJ Green injury. That's tough because they brought him in. They were excited about what he could do, and I think everyone was right what he could do with Ollie Gordon. And unfortunately, we won't get to see it this year. But well, who knows in November? But in terms of win total, in terms of season outlook, not factoring AJ Green much into this year, which is a shame.
Yeah. So I'll move over to that wide receiver room because I like it. All right. Rashad Owens is a guy that I love, man. I love his game. He's physical. He attacks the ball down the field. He's a deep threat. You can just throw it up to him. He's got a good connection there with Alan Bowman. I think that really blossomed last year. Brendan Presley's the guy that you know he's going to be good. All right, versatile weapon. Put him in the slot. Um, he's going to have an impact in the return game likely this year. Hopefully I put him. Hopefully they put him back there. And I mean, that's a guy that they're dinking and dunking to, right? I mean, only an average depth of target of about 5 yards. Rashad Owens is the guy that they're pushing the ball down the field to. And I think Alan Bowman did an okay job of that last year. I know you're looking at that 15 touchdown to 14 interception ratio, and you're like, it's not that good. I'm like, guys, I really think Alan Bowman is not as bad as we're painting him to be. I really don't think so. Plus, like, when you're in the red zone, like, and you're not handing the ball to Ollie Gordon 75% of the time, like, what are we doing? So like I think some of that touchdown production went to Ollie Gordon for sure. But yeah, and then Stribling is another guy that I like as well. Came in from Washington State last year. saw a couple games of action, but he looks to be back this year. I think this receiving core can be pretty decent.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there too. I think especially those top three. Stribling's guy, obviously you mentioned Presley Owens. They get the bulk of the love as they should. They were really, really good for them last year. You mentioned that the difference is what they can do. Presley a little bit more underneath, Gadget, just like get him the ball in space and let him create. Owens a little bit more X type receiver where he can really, win vertically down the field. He can win out of his breaks. I mean, his average depth target was over 12, almost 13, which is really, really good. So, but Stribling, yeah, that's a nice compliment. And I think also if you are Oklahoma State, right, if you're Mike Gundy and you have a guy like Ollie Gordman, teams know that, right? They understand that he had over 1,700 yards last year, 21 touchdowns, 300 more receptions through the air. You're going to load the box. You're going to do what you can to stop Ollie Gordon. And if you can have receivers, right, not only Rashad Owens, but Stribling as well, push the ball down the field. And I think that's just creates even more matchup nightmares for you if you're Oklahoma State.
Agreed. Uh,
And yeah, and we'll get into it too, but you have a pretty damn good O line. I'm sorry, you have an experienced O line returning, right? So you're gonna have time in the pocket at times to push the ball down the field. And if you're Alan Bowman, like you said, I mean, if you're a seventh year guy like him, somehow has eligibility. Um, but I guess you could take advantage of that if you're sitting in the pocket, right?
well, yeah, let's talk about the offensive line. I mean, you say experienced, I say veterans. I mean, I'm looking at the offensive line, and it's redshirt senior, redshirt senior, redshirt senior, redshirt senior, and then redshirt junior or junior or senior, I guess depending who starts there. But um, yeah, I mean, take me through this offensive line. What do you like about it?
Just the experience coming back. Continuity is important, right? I don't know about the depth after those top 6 or 7 guys. Hopefully, you don't get into a situation where you have to play those guys. But the reality is, you might have to, you might not. But they're going to be relied upon to run the football, and I think they're probably going to enjoy it, right? I mean, they graded out pretty well running. Run, they didn't grade out well running the ball, run blocking. I'm sorry, but they still
But it
ran the
didn't
ball
matter.
effectively. It didn't matter exactly. So I do think you have another offseason um to really get after it, as a defense and whatnot, or I'm sorry, as an offensive line against the defense. I think it'll help in terms of knowing what you're gonna have to do this year, next year, getting better at it, having a commitment to run the football this offseason because they kind of went in the season and they weren't really expecting to run the ball as much as they did, or at least find a guy like Ollie Gordon that was that freaking talented. And they kind of walked back into it and they're like, oh, well, we're going to start winning games when we hand the ball to Ollie Gordon 30 times. And they did that and he was so good. And they started running the ball, winning games, obviously. So we'll see how it is this offseason. I expect, a little bit of a step up in terms of production and talent coming back.
Well, let's move over then to the defensive side of the ball. They did not play good defense last year. All right. They did not play very good defense last year. They were a bottom quarter defense last year. If I'm being pretty generous here. Uh yeah, you return a guy like Nick Barton at linebacker who was fantastic last year, I thought. Um I, yeah, I just don't know how much they improved on this defensive side of the ball. Can you convince me otherwise?
I mean, they were not good last year. I don't know if it gets worse, right? We'll see how Obi Zigbo plays. He's got to deal with the D2 transfer. I'm sorry, transferring from D2 to D1, coming from Gannon University. We'll see if he can elevate the edge group there. You lose Anthony Goodlow and Nathan Latu. How much does that really impact your team? I don't know. I think those guys are pretty replaceable. I think Zigbo can at least give you a little bit of upside if he hits that ceiling and that potential to maybe increase your pass rush just a little bit. Colin Clay and Kirkland return, good on them. They got you almost 400 snaps apiece last year, which is nice to have returning production in the Big 12, or maybe returning experience in the Big 12, obviously up front. But yeah, that linebacker room, I mean, you lose Xavier Benson, who was pretty good for you, but you said Nick Martin, Colin Oliver, those guys are good. I think you can find creative ways to rush the passer with a guy like Colin Oliver. And then obviously Justin Wright as well behind them. So we'll see about that front seven. Obviously, we've talked about it in just about every one of these teams, right? The importance of having a good front seven, the importance of stopping the run in the Big 12. Oklahoma State knows that all too well, right? They're going to do it to other teams. They're going to run the football. They're going to try to establish, a control clock, right? Keep these quarterbacks of these opposing teams off the field, right? By running the football yourself. And if you're a team like Oklahoma State and you want to play that style, you also have to get off the field on third down. You have to create negative plays defensively, right? So keep that offense behind the chains, and disrupt that running game, for the rest of the Big 12. So we'll see. I don't know how confident I am in that happening, but I do think if you see it a little bit, right, this could be where you're seeing Oklahoma State hit their potential and hit their stride in the Big 12. We're talking about conference contender for sure, as we stand right now. But if they hit their, potential quote unquote ceiling of their defense and their front seven, I think you feel pretty good about them potentially returning back to that Big 12 championship game.
Yeah, defense was really bad last year, but they overcame stuff, man. But also, they didn't have the schedule, right? Last year. This year, I do think their schedule benefits them a lot. I mean, I'm looking at it and I'm like, okay, Texas Tech is going to be tough. At TCU is going to be tough. West Virginia, Kansas State, Utah, and yeah, 9.5 feels like a lot to me. 9.5 feels like a lot, but I guess we haven't really talked about the secondary. Yeah, so the secondary gave up a whopping 275 yards passing last year. Now, there were some really effective passing offenses in the Big 12, but that is a lot. All right. And they also averaged 8.8 yards per attempt allowed passing the ball, 14.6 yards per completion, which was bottom 5 in the country. That The secondary was bad last year. No, I mean, it was terrible. What did they do to improve it, right? Because they're running it back with Trey Rucker, right, who was effective in the run game, but I he was not very good in coverage.
No, I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, at least you've got experience. I think that's what you're on your side. You've got two safeties, Kendall Daniels and Trey Recker, like you said, that have over 900 snaps on their belt just from last year alone. And then Kobe Hilton coming in from UTEP to give you a nice little, boost in that room there as well. I guess Corey Black, he was, I guess, maybe one of your bright spots last year in that secondary as a cornerback, over 700 snaps, graded out well, PFF wise as well. And then I guess Cameron Epps, as he can play a little bit um, of that nickel or maybe even cornerback role as well. I don't know, man. I mean, you lose DJ McKinney over to Colorado. That's not ideal. We'll see. I don't know. I really don't know. I think Oklahoma State might have to outscore people. I think they might have to be opportunistic defensively, creating turnovers and be really creative with what they can do, disguising coverages and kind of making up for some limitations they might have talent wise. But they're gonna have, their staff's gonna have a lot of work to do. Brian Nardo.
Yeah. I want to go back to their schedule though, right? And what I was looking for in the schedule, it's like, are they going to be playing against teams that are going to be throwing the ball a ton on them, right? And I look at teams like BYU and I go, maybe not. Baylor, eh. Arizona State, probably not. A game like Colorado scares me a little bit, to be honest. I don't think
at Colorado
Colorado
too.
at Colorado. That's a game that scares me at the end of the season. Not gonna lie, I think Colorado matches up pretty well. Utah is an interesting one. Um, I think they'll beat Arkansas if I had to guess. I think it's a very clear under 9.5, but that doesn't mean that they can't make the
Well,
Big 12 championship game.
real quick, I do think it's 8.5. It's 8 and 8.5 most
Oh, is it
places.
8? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I had it written down as 9.5. Good catch.
It might
Uh,
kind of move, but yeah, 9.5 would be way
yeah.
way
Okay.
well under.
Maybe I gotta recalibrate here, but yeah. What are you going with?
I don't know. You mentioned that Colorado game. Colorado's interesting because last year we saw them get off to a pretty hot start. Now, wasn't the teams they played. Maybe TCU didn't turn out as good as we thought they would be. Nebraska as well. They just matched up well against, and then obviously Colorado State. Not elite powerhouse quite yet under Jay Norvell. But I do think Colorado this year, in terms of the talent that they bring in and the depth they have, actually bodes well to play them early in the year, where they don't have a ton of continuity along those offensive and defensive lines. I think come week 14, I think they have the depth to get through a season that is the Big 12, and I do think they're going to kind of create continuity and chemistry defensively, and I think that might hurt Oklahoma State, come late November, right? But I think you're right though in terms of teams that don't really scare you vertically. I mean, Utah is going to throw the ball better this year, obviously with Cam Rising. But I mean, TCU, they got some nice weapons as well. You really like that. I don't know. I lean under just because I think they overachieved last year. I really do. I think they got hot at home, right? And they beat some teams like Kansas, Kansas State, and Oklahoma at home that maybe you know, you just kind of I don't know if you've played those games 10 times. I don't know if Oklahoma State's winning most of those games, but the reality is, I mean, they did well last year. I just think they're gonna kind of come back down to earth maybe a little bit. But by the way, I'm probably gonna regret saying that because some things we learned doing this podcast here is you just don't doubt Mike Gundy, right? He's a guy that has been there for what 20 seasons now. Holy cow. And every time you think that there's limitations on his roster, and maybe there is, but he just kind of overcomes them anyways. And I usually has success there in the Big 12.
Yeah. Did they win? They won 9 games right year. They went 9-3.
Yes.
That's crazy, dude. If they'd beaten South Alabama and had the right quarterback and ran the ball, they would have been a 10-win team last year
And they could have beaten Iowa State. And then they had a fluky game
against
against
UCF.
UCF. They lost by 40 some, which I know obviously doesn't make it sound like they could have won that game, but I'm not trying to convince you that they would have, but that was just a weird game as well. But yeah, like
Raining.
a couple duds, they laid a couple eggs and they just won everything else. In pretty close fashion. That BYU game was crazy as well. I think that was overtime. Uh, they came back and won that game. They
Yeah.
should not have. But
I mean, at 9.5, I'm for sure taking the under, right? And I was like, man, that's nuts at the line. But now that I'm thinking about it at 8.5, because now it's on my screen at 8.5, I think they can get there. Um, I don't know, because like I look at it and I'm like, which outcome is more likely, right? Like to me, it was like, oh, 9-3 is way more likely than 10-2. Or look at 8-4 versus 9-3. I mean, like they overcame a lot last year, um, offensively. And Kansas State, the team that they're gonna be able to run the ball on. Uh, I'm gonna obviously I'm not betting this, but I'm gonna take the over. I think 9-3 is the most likely outcome with this team because they're running it back with all this talent on offense. And I believe in Alan Bowman. I believe in Alan Bowman. I know so many people out there don't. I'm I'm okay. Yeah. But the reasoning is I think 9-3 is the most likely outcome with the schedule. So
yeah, I mean, no
um
complaints here. I mean, I get you were right. You knew them all along last year, so I guess you got a finger on the program.
I guess. I don't know. I mean, this is not the same as last year. Last year's schedule set up really nicely. This one is not as nice.